Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll just take off and start the session. Thanks for coming. My name is Chetwynd. I'm the Global News Director of AFP, Agence France-Presse. And we're going to look at this issue of going behind the metrics and asking, fairly fundamental questions about what is the impact of journalism, what is our value in society. The idea for the session was born out of World News Day, which was something promoted by the World Editors Forum and WANIFRA, to really, this feeling of the need to sort of start communicating again about the value of journalism and news. A kind of feeling in the industry that maybe there was a PR problem. We haven't actually been telling people the value of what we do. And especially in the kind of early phase of the digital age where everybody was just looking for reach and looking to get as many eyeballs on content as possible, that maybe some of these underlying issues were not looked at. So the question is, what role does journalism play in society? We all know that the context is really tough. Many of our journalists face hostility, abuse, both on the streets and in social media online. And just as a context of the discussion, we remember that the Reuters Digital News Report tells us that people are, one, avoiding news, and that really only 4 out of 10 people around the world trust what we do. And in some places, even nearby, I'm based in France, that falls to 29%. And of course, in America, it goes even lower, I think, to 26%. So the question is really, have we been complacent about the impact of journalism on society? And what do we need to ensure that we do a better job in ensuring that journalism plays a role in society and take it from there? I've got a fantastic panel who've been thinking about this much more than me over the last few years. On my left, Ritu Kapur, who's the co-founder of the Indian digital media site, The Quint, which was set up in 2015. The Quint has won multiple awards with a strong, focused mission of telling stories that nobody else in India is willing to tell. And interestingly, a majority of the Quint's audience is between 18 and 34. Styli Charalambous is the co-founder of the pioneering South African online news organization, the Daily Maverick. The site has grown from a staff of 5 when it was set up in 2009 to some 120 today. It's made its name with powerful investigations into national scandals in South Africa, such as the killing of 34 miners by police at a mine at a place called Marikana. And on my right, Richard Addy is an economist and co-founder of the international audience strategy consultancy ACAS, and over the past 3 decades has worked with some of the biggest brands in journalism, such as BBC, NPR, Guardian, looking at these issues of impact and broader strategy. So maybe just to kick off the conversation, I'll turn to Richard. You have been looking at this issue widely across media, old media, new media, for some time. Is it fair enough to say that journalism has been complacent about this issue of impact, and we've slightly taken our role in society for granted?
Well, the short answer to that, Phil, is yes. I think about 20 years ago, I was involved when I was at the BBC in a document called Building Public Value. And that was the first time I saw, and I think in the industry, that the notion of public value, impact beyond the eyeballs, beyond viewers, beyond listeners, was explored. And at the time, when we talked about impact with our journalist colleagues, there were looks of disgust, really, because journalism should just be about the journalism. And what was this talk about impact? It was too business-like, etc. Since then, 20 years ago, broadly speaking, revenues from circulation and ads declined by half, and we'd be lucky if in the next 10 years they don't decline by another 25%. We also see, as Phil just mentioned, news avoiders, but what's concerning us at ACAS, the consultancy I work, I've co-founded, what concerns us is we're beginning to see a decline in interest in news at a kind of global level. One of the things we do is we track trends in Google Trends and other things, and you're beginning to see, for the first time in 20 years, searches for newspapers and news starting to decline. It peaked in COVID. We all got very excited. We thought news was back. but we're beginning to see a decline. So around all of that, we need to make the case for journalism. The revenues are under pressure. We're now beginning to see eyeballs under pressure. And for some time, I'd argue that we took it for granted that journalism was a good thing, and specifically areas that audiences have a stronger affinity with, like investigative journalism, took it for granted. But the research I've seen shows that the good news is opinion formers think that. Of course, journalists think that too, but audiences have a much less strong assessment of how impactful journalism is. And then the final thing I'll leave you with is needing ourselves to believe in our own journalism. So there's this great study called the Worlds of Journalism study, looks at 50 countries, asks journalism what they think about a whole range of things. And when it asks journalists whether they trust news media, only about 35% of them think so. So why do journalists not trust journalism?
And what's your answer to that?
Well, across time, they're beginning to see elements of journalism that they don't like. So we talk about journalism as one thing, but even audiences see investigative journalism as much more trustworthy than, say, entertainment journalism or even political journalism. So it's because there's a variation. We use this term journalism as a kind of holistic thing, but we need to break it down further.
Thanks, Richard. Ritu, when you set up the Quint in 2015, obviously you were coming from it, with a pretty strong mission, as many, new media, digital-first media do. And so I imagine this whole issue of impact was, more in your thoughts than perhaps for legacy media at that time. And I'm just wondering, how you thought about it at that point, and also how it evolved over time, how it's evolved since you started.
So, just as context, before the Quint was born, we had been broadcasters. We had a massive broadcast network, and we had to exit because of financial issues. But therefore, the mission when we started the Quint was broadcast news in India was targeting a certain audience, which was 40 plus. It was targeting male audiences. And journalism was seen as journalists are truth owners or truth holders and not truth seekers. And they are there to then, like the oracle, just give out the information to the audience. And the premise behind the Quint was that now that news is moving, in 2015 it hadn't happened, but it will move to handheld devices. It's now time to engage the young who are interested in current affairs, only nobody is putting together news in a vocabulary or in visual formats where the young want to participate in, which is different from consuming it. And the view also was that it's all going to move to very visual, but it's not going to be the same visual language as that of broadcast. It's not going to be the same text language as of print. And so that was the mission. We were born as just a Facebook page, and the idea behind first being born as a Facebook page was also because the technology was taking very long for our CMS to be built out, but also because we wanted to see what is the impact of what we are doing to a large audience to begin with. We wouldn't have had that large audience had we started the website first. And that 1 month of just being on Facebook did two things. A, it put our brand out there. There was no way we could have even thought of competing with legacy brands, without social media as your marketing platform. But it also gave us a sense of how the young are reacting and responding to the kind of pieces that we were doing. We realized that one of the things that we had wrong in our heads was that you got to put news in the BuzzFeed sort of format for the young to interact with it. We realized that younger audiences were very seriously wanting to engage with pretty solid, even long-form news content. And so that sort of was the first response of impact of what we were doing, and then evolved basis that. After that, since the political situation in the country and the cultural, the religious chauvinism, and I'm sure all of you are aware of what's going on in the country, in India, when that changed, we actually moved from looking at our impact very differently. Today, we don't look so much at page views, unique views, but what is important is time on page. What is important is depth of consumption with tools like Chartbeat. And we're now stepping away from the trending, SEO-driven, large volume game, because what we realize is that we need to be able to, with reducing revenue, we need to be investing in really meaningful journalism where the impact, the social value impact of that journalism is not that easy, it's not tangible. There is no Google Analytics or any other metrics tool to go and measure it. But we have now evolved our own inferences with every piece that we publish on what kind of an impact that is happening with the journalism that we're doing.
So is that a sort of discussion that's had where you use your journalistic judgment, in a sense, to assess that impact?
I think we look a lot at the commenting,
right,
and how the commenting for us, for instance, changed from very troll-driven, we hate you, you're just pro-Muslim, or you are anti-government. Or we've seen that conversation change from that to individual engagement on the stories that we are doing, especially when we go out and do ground reports, and there is so much visual evidence to what we've done, to the story that we are bringing. So I think it's looking at that kind of is it changing the discourse? Is it changing? It's also interesting when we found that our audience demographic, the 40 plus, also started coming in.
Right.
And they started engaging with us even in the sort of quicker, cooler platforms like Instagram, where we are using those formats. We also found that when we looked much more at women's health issues, we found that with doing that kind of content, we saw that the demographic changed. Our women audiences moved from being less than 17% to over 33%.
Right.
So it's those kind of...
in a sense, engaging with new audiences, partly, right?
Yeah.
Right, great. Thanks, Ritu. Styli, the Daily Maverick has had also an incredibly strong mission, sense from its inception. I think your banner line is "Defend Truth," which is both ambitious and I believe necessary in South Africa. Again, how did you think about that issue of impact when you started the Daily Maverick, and how has it changed since then? And I know in particular, how did some of your major investigations kind of move the dial on your thinking around impact?
Yeah, honestly, we didn't think about it when we started.
Right.
It wasn't really in our lexicon when we were thinking about getting it going. We really just wanted to bring magazine quality features to the internet when all the good writing was being put behind paywalls or kept for print publications. And as the industry started crumbling, as people started leaving journalism, as organizations became corrupted by politically compromised individuals, all of this was happening around us, and corruption was starting to seep into all parts of the organs of the state. And it became clear that we were needed to respond to what was happening by becoming more focused on creating the kind of impact that journalism can do in a country riddled with so many issues. And so it evolved. And Marikana, as you mentioned, was a huge turning point for us when we saw what was coming out through the Wire South African version of the wire that was feeding into all the other outlets, and what was going on the ground that we were seeing. We had people on the ground who were seeing something completely different to what was being picked up and then being distributed and then being run in all the news outlets. And so we realized that we were almost on our own in terms of covering this properly. And so that really affected how we needed to think about changing, how to become more impactful in our work, and from that, and then got more and more into investigations, which started having bigger and bigger societal impact, like at the top levels of government, and sort of culminated in Defend Truth, picking that up a few years ago, as it came under attack everywhere in the world, not just in South Africa, and so we got gradually better and better at thinking about this, and I think where we get to now is that we really are in a place where we talk a lot about measuring what matters, but in order to do that, we have to figure out what it is that matters, defining it, what is important to us, what is journalism for, what is the vision of the organization that sits on top of that, and how that influences our goals, and even with impact, like what is the impact that we want to achieve in the world, and not just thinking about it as a reactive reporting element, but sitting down before we start creating, before we start planning and setting those goals and saying, well, what are the policy changes or what are the societal impact changes that we'd like to see in the world? And then work towards that and work backwards to make those things a reality. And so that started becoming a bigger part of our process, and I'd say spending a lot more time thinking about that and being more conscious of that in the last couple of years.
And if I'm right in thinking, you've actually sort of developed a process, right? When you start to look at stories within each team to try to think about impact of each individual coverage before you do it?
Yeah, so a good example of that is when we launched our climate change and environmental crisis reporting team, and their vision was to raise the awareness of the crisis in a country like South Africa, where we have so many other problems to worry about on a day-to-day basis. And when we started what the world worries about, the Ipsos report, only 3% of South Africans were worried about the impact of climate change. Now, this is in a country where there's at least one province running out of water at any given time. The biodiversity impact and the loss there, the impact that it will have on food security for us is massive. And so it was how do we, the awareness really needed to be increased with regards to this problem. And so we launched this team. It's the biggest climate change reporting team in the Southern Hemisphere that I know of. And from that, 3 years later, that number has now risen to 12%. I don't take pride in adding more anxiety into the world, but awareness is the beginning, is the start of change, right? And so, we can probably lay claim to some of that rise, given the work that we've done and having a dedicated team. And so, but having that goal up front, stating that as the vision that the team wanted to achieve, and then working backwards to figure out, well, in order to do that, we need to have these amount of resources. We need to cover these areas, which we did in conjunction with a research project with Wits University. And so all of that helped us plan what we were going to do and be more proactive, rather than just letting our efforts be reactive to a news cycle.
And then do you record that and sort of interact with that information with your audience, with your readers?
Yeah, so we will do it in multiple ways. With our audience, we'll try and obviously through the reporting that we do, they'll see that, but then we also use that in our reader revenue program, a voluntary membership program. And so we'll take the impact of that work and we'll clarify it, and we'll be explicit about the benefits that arise from that impact. And then we'll filter that back to people and say, look, these are the benefits that accrue from the impact of the work that we're doing. We want to do more of it. We need your help to do that. So join our cause, and we will be able to do that. And so it comes in through, acquisition marketing for our membership program, and then obviously being able to share that in places like this.
Ritu, did you have those similar conversations in the newsroom ahead of reporting stories, that everybody actually among the journalists sits and thinks, hang on, these stories we're going to work on, what's the point of them, what's the impact of them? Is that a conversation you can have?
I think that's a conversation that I don't think we set out with every story saying we must do this story because it will have X impact. I think some stories need to be told, especially since we pride ourselves in going out and getting the stories that nobody else is really willing to touch anymore in the country. But I think there is a lot of learnings from some stories that we do and the response to the stories, and then how those learnings then determine the stories that we then do following that. I'm sounding a little vague. I'll give you an example. For instance, climate change. We set up a climate change desk as well. And in India, climate change is not a conversation. People are not talking about it. If there is a natural disaster, it's just something that happened locally or some karmic, some god getting angry, etc. The important thing we discovered is that when we were doing climate change and that our audiences were urban, and when we were going and investing a lot of resources in going and getting stories about remote areas in the country which were being very seriously and very adversely affected, including issues of food security, we found that there was no engagement with that content. So our lack of impact from that kind of content led to us saying, let's focus on the cities. Right. And that's when we did a documentary on how Mumbai is sinking, and that had tremendous impact. Similarly, we set up a fact-checking desk. Now, the intention was to inject and inoculate really important information in the system, but we realized that the misinformation was actually floating around in messaging platforms, and it wasn't really as much on social media, and definitely not. People are not coming to a website to say, okay, I want this fact checked and I want to see this. So for us, the impact again was we opened ourselves saying anyone among our audiences who comes across anything that's slightly suspect, that they think needs to be fact checked, share it with us, we'll fact check that. Now for us, a measure of the impact is the volume of the number of people who write in every day now, right, who are now aware of the fact that what they come across as posts on messaging platforms could be misleading, and the fact that they now think it's worth their while to come to us to get that checked. Or even if they don't do that, the fact that we have now put that thought out there. Similarly, if you're able to, through our election coverage, get people to make more informed decisions on who their vote goes to. Now it's immeasurable impact.
Sure. So it's sort of where your journalism leaves the newsroom, and there's a sort of physical interaction with the people on the other end, as it were.
Right, virtual interaction, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Virtual interaction. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Richard, you've looked specifically at developing impact frameworks, right? That you've worked with your clients. There's something more, I guess, mathematical or mechanical. Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could.
Yeah, I think we've got a slide, a few slides to share, showing this. Basically, through my time at the BBC and then working with other news organisations, The Guardian, and with the Gates Foundation, who've invested a lot in this space, we've developed a kind of way of trying to get all news organisations to codify what you know, to start to measure it, and to put some structure around a lot of what you do. And the fundamental thing, and I think actually the exciting thing, is that we find time and time again that journalists and news organisations underrepresent or undercount the impact that they're having. Instinctively, we want you to apply your investigative journalistic skills to impact. Just find where those impacts are. So we've got this framework, this wheel, which just asks some of the basic questions. And in fact, I'd say that Ritu and Styli have touched on a number of dimensions of this framework. So the first thing around content, I'll go through it very quickly, around context, is to understand some of the trends. And we just heard a discussion about Ipsos's what the world worries about. Every month they track global concerns and in-country concerns. That almost gives you a base to which you can, see what you want to change, as the Maverick did on climate change. So track what's out there, understand the environment, understand where your audience are. That's the context. And then in terms of the strategy, it's impactful if you publicly state that you want to make a difference on something. That in itself brings the issue into the debate, brings the issue into the discussion. And then the traditional thing around context and content and outputs. Literally, what are you pushing out there? Are there some exclusives? Are you giving voice to the voiceless? That's all impact. And then typically when we talk about impact, we talk about the short-term things, which are the impressions and clicks and all those kind of things. It's still important to track them because they're very aligned to your revenues, etc. But then we get into the really interesting thing, which is public impacts, influencer impacts, decision-maker impacts. And those are all around codifying the things that you think are instinctive, the comments from your audiences, or if you've got the capability to survey your audiences to find out what they think about your copy. Has their knowledge increased? Have they taken action as a result of it? And then influence and decision makers. Those are the people that often we think about when we talk about impacts. And it's very difficult to measure. But one thing that we do know is that you will hear a story of the minister that referred to a document. Or you might hear the story of a policy influencer who has linked into your copy or who has referenced it in the speech. And what we're arguing is codify that, write it down, either in a spreadsheet or in some other tools that I'll show you in a moment. And that's a way of almost bringing structure to what you know. You can also do it digitally, what you're being linked to. So there's a real opportunity there to capture what we know. And then behind that, there's all these different dimensions that we look at that I won't go into because there are probably a few geeks in the room that won't like this. But there's one tool that we didn't develop that I'd like to share, which is the Impact Architect Impact Tracker. It's not an AI impact tracker, as some of you may think. It's just an Impact Architect tracker. And what's great about this tool is open source. And what they and we've worked with them for a number of years. They work with a large number of organizations and with foundations. And what's great about the Impact Tracker is it enables you just to collect all that you know in buckets. Some of them more sophisticated, others less sophisticated. It's a really good way of capturing what our colleagues have been talking about.
Thanks, Richard. That's great. Styli, have you been working with any of these kind of tools? How do you actually, I'm quite interested in how you sort of literally record your impact and how you share that with your staff, and how do you have a big scoreboard on the wall with kind of ministers taken down or corruption? How do you think about that?
We'd probably run out of space, I think, with the scoreboard. No, I wish I could sit here and say that it was as formalized as that. I'm sitting here thinking there's actually a permanent role that I need to create in my organization for this,
right.
And we'll do this. It's right now. It's one of my big takeaways from Perugia. Thank you, guys. And we have started looking at that particular framework as well and using that. As I said, we do use the value of the impact in our acquisition marketing. I can tell you that impact isn't good for business. It is great for business, which makes, and I'm on the making sure people get paid side of my organization. So that's great for me. It's great for members coming on board with a voluntary membership program. We keep all our journalism free for everyone in a country where that's even more important for those who can't afford to pay. And that's one of the biggest drivers of why people come on board, is because they can see and feel and experience the impact of our journalism at a national level, on the ground, at a personal level, at a societal level, at an institutional level. All of that does, and so we then filter that back into the marketing. We then also report on that to our members to let them know, hey, your support has helped us do this, this, and this. And the net result of that is that Daily Maverick has the highest retention rate of any of our peers in a group of 135 benchmarked organizations after 3 years. And I think a big part of that is because we do achieve so much impact, and we do also do relatively okay in communicating that back, but I'm also acknowledge that we can do a lot better on that.
And you've done some work with philanthropic foundations, right? Or some funding. And I guess that's a big trend in journalism that is probably forcing many newsrooms to change how they think about this issue, in that often when you're really pitching for funds, this issue of impact is something now that newsrooms are having to think about, even big traditional newsrooms, in a way that they probably haven't done before. Was that your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So grant funding, you have to report back on that. When we pitch for grants, the impact is something that you put right up front. This is what we want to achieve this is what we hope to achieve with the work. And then you have to report on that to see, well, did you achieve that? And so each of the grant funded areas do quite well, and on reporting that back to the grant funders. But that is just like it's an afterthought to kind of make sure that the grant gets renewed, basically.
Right.
But there's just so much of it, and it's just, again, dawning on me that this is a full-time gig, basically, for an organization that prides itself and bases pretty much its entire editorial vision on impact.
Thanks, Styli. Ritu, just to change tack a little bit, I was interested in talking to you before, where we talked about the issue of the format of your journalism. It's one thing to do great journalism, but then thinking how you change the format of it to bring the impact that we're looking for.
That's something that we feel really strongly about at the Quint, and innovation in storytelling format is an area of focus for us all the time. What we find is that, obviously, everyone knows that it's an attention deficit audience in terms of, it's very distracted, it's a very distributed audience. So the answer is not just doing the Reels version of everything or doing the, YouTube shorts we don't have TikTok in India. But what do you put out on which platform, at what time of the day, and how do you drive, for us, we feel that you have better impact if you drive conversation around it. For instance, if we did a series on what's coming between women and the workplace, we actually did an entire call to action, and we wanted people to engage on that debate. And we would constantly, in real time, as people were sending in what they thought, and interestingly, a lot of men sent in their views, we actually converted that into content itself, in terms of the content. So it becomes, so it's not just the multiple and the multimedia formats. We do a lot of immersives, but the important thing is how do you drive audiences to the immersives? Right. And that has been that's one of the places where we look at page views or UVs as a measure of impact because we did this innovation in storytelling, and it led to so many more people at least coming and consuming that. Yeah. But there are larger things, like when you're pushing for policy change, for instance, I won't get into what it was, but there's a huge issue of electoral bonds, which we did investigations until it became an issue in the parliament, and it's now in the Supreme Court. So there hasn't been a change, but at least it's brought the conversation up. But again, something as complex as electoral bonds, the government claims are anonymous, but they are not. It's a very complex technical thing. So there was a huge challenge on how do you, without dumbing it down, how do you make that content accessible? Right. So that's the kind of thinking that's happening around every piece of content that we're doing.
Sure. And Styli, I was interested in terms of when you think about formats. You recently, you started off entirely online, and then you actually went to some paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm interested in the thinking behind that, How did that enter in the conversation?
Yeah, I think the headline at the time was madder than a bag of snakes, launching a print publication in the middle of COVID, and that was probably true. We had a hypothesis that it wasn't the medium that was problematic. It was that irrelevant, poor quality journalism on the medium was the problem. And once we tested that, then we had the confidence to go ahead and launch. And so we're 2.5 years into that, and it's the only newspaper that's growing in the country. It's almost broken even, and so we're very happy with the results to date. And so it's just another, but we've done it in an incredibly lean and smart way. And again, just thinking about the needs of the people that we're serving, and why they want to lean back with their reading experience of the news in that way. But yeah, and then just to add just a point on measuring the impact quickly is obviously with investigations, it's a lot easier to remember and write it down and use that in whatever shape or form. It's a little bit harder when it's coverage and maybe it's analysis or reporting that goes out, and you're not quite sure when or how it happens. And so that's a lot harder to do. And so you have to rely on different methods to do that, right? And sometimes you have to really go work hard to go and find that and inquire and survey and hope for feedback and comments and so many different ways. And I think that adds to the difficulty of being able to measure and report on it and then also make a thing of it.
Although I guess one thing for both the Quint and Maverick must be you both have memberships, right? Which, differently from subscription, must give you that sort of much more raw feedback, I guess, or raw interaction with your audience, or validation from your audience. Because there's a difference between having a member who's buying into what you're doing and a subscriber, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about, even the words we use in the marketing are very different. This isn't about getting access to content. It's about joining a cause and having a voluntary membership program where there is no paywall, where it's unrestricted. It is the rawest form of feedback that you can get, because people will only join if they believe you are achieving that impact and working towards your vision and mission. And because they can cancel at any time, the minute you stray from that, then you're just going to see people leaving in droves. And so it's this great check that we have on staying true to what we're trying to achieve with that, and to keep fueling that. And as more and more people come on board, we can do more of it and stay true to that. And so it's really great model for us and the type of work that we want to do, and also helps protect us from future risks around the work that we do as well.
Ritu, have you had similar experiences with membership?
Yes, because apart from membership, which is a straight-up membership, if you believe in the kind of journalism we do, please come and help us, support us financially and in terms of ideation. But we also have another model where we say, okay, this is the next story that we're going to do, if it's a special project or a big investigation, and transparently say this is how much it's going to cost us, but more importantly say this is why we're going to do it. And a clear sense of impact from both before we do the story and the kind of support that comes in, and the support that comes in after we put out the story, gives you a sense of which kind of projects matter to people who are not members yet but are willing to support a campaign.
Right.
And it's really a conversation with us. We do these regular brainstorming sessions, and the idea of building a climate change vertical actually came out of the members telling us this in a session, saying we'd like to support you more should you focus on climate change. So there is
that's a trend we're seeing, right? With the kind of news organizations that are building memberships are the kind of organizations that are having bigger impact in journalism.
Yeah, because when you start down the membership model beyond subscription, membership is by definition you're trying to have a deeper relationship with your audiences. So when you start that journey, it's a corollary of it that you need to understand what your members want. You have a much more of a two-way conversation, and invariably members want to know much more about news production. How did the story come about? And to build that relationship, you're increasingly sharing the difference the stories are making. So yeah, it's a very strong trend in terms of impact understanding.
So if I could just, come in here. So for us, a member is not just somebody who pays a certain amount of money. If you become a citizen journalist with us, then you become a member. If you participate in our fact-checking process with us, then you become a member. So, and the citizen journalism bit in terms of impact is very interesting because, we help the citizen journalist put the story together visually, etc., to tell it. But when, and India is sort of large and very, very diverse, but it's interesting in terms of impact when a citizen journalist from the north of India comes up with an issue with water. Suddenly there's a resonance from various other parts of the country saying, I'd like to be a citizen journalist because I have a similar problem in my part of the country. So there is the community building. Also, our members can write opinions on the site. So you write an opinion, you also become a member. So it's not so much a transactional relationship for us.
And Styli, do you have that physical interaction with the audience in that same way? People who contribute either to the journalism through ideas, through fact-checking, citizen journalism, meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things we do when people sign up is we ask them if they have a superpower and if they're willing to share that superpower with us and be on our database for when we might need them, either as a source, as an expert, and we often ask them for suggestions for panels, and even have had our members as experts in their field host panels at our events as well. And this really came to the fore in COVID, where I think 2 or 3 people on the government's council response to COVID were actually Maverick insiders on our members. So we had access to the top minds leading the policy of COVID response in the country. And so engagement with our members has been incredible beyond just the financial transaction. I really love the idea of the citizen journalists being members, by the way, and then finding different ways to do that. And I think there's so many more ways we can do, and we hope to do. But interestingly enough, it was also the Trojan horse by which we got engaged journalism into the newsroom, because it started out in the membership team, which was a new team, and we could design it in the way that we wanted. And as these practices started becoming more fruitful and people noticing it, it was easier to then introduce more engaged journalism into the newsroom. And we have this really successful newsletter now called Your Questions Answered, where we'll put out questions around a theme. It'll come back, we'll categorize them, and then we'll go out and then create the journalism in response to those questions. And I can tell you that the open rates on that newsletter are like some of the highest, 60-70%, and that's to a big, large audience. And the kind of journalism that is created off the back of that is just so much more relevant. People appreciate being part of the process, and it also helps us stay in tune with the needs of the people that we claim to serve.
Richard, going back to our sort of the way we framed the session at the beginning of a sort of these profound questions about role of journalism in society, do you think there are elements for optimism of sort of the way we're re-engaging?
Oh, definitely. I think on 2 levels really. There's the granular level of news organisations getting that sense of impact is important. That getting roles like impact producers, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism invested in impact producer some years ago, and a really powerful role. So that's exciting that finally we're beginning to understand that impact can tell part of the story of why journalism is important. And then I think there's another level, which is, if you think about what I've just said as being granular at a news organisation level, there's a kind of global need, which I'm increasingly interested in, and hopefully over the next few years we'll be able to do some work on it, around the difference that journalism makes in terms of saving and enhancing lives. There's a great book called Democracy Detectives by James T. Hamilton. He looked at Pulitzer Prize winners and showed that there is an extraordinary level of life enhancement and life saving, which we just kind of don't talk about. And if you think about the journalism globally, we're talking about millions of people's lives, maybe billions of people's lives being enhanced positively and saved. ideally by journalism. And making that case is important because, unfortunately, I don't think the revenues are going to be able to sustain journalism commercially. So there needs to be those other sources, be it funders, be it regulators, government, and the case needs to be made to those funders that much more money needs to be put into this social good.
And why aren't we telling that story? Is that simply that journalists are sort of bad at writing or reporting on journalism? I mean, is that the issue? We're kind of embarrassed? Or?
I think there are a number of reasons. One is that there isn't a full awareness of the range of impact. Most organisations, most journalists are thinking about their own journalism, about their own organisation. Frankly, the survival, it's a tough time. So that kind of level of discussion needs to be done at forums like this, where we start to get to think about how can we make that case collectively. But also, journalists don't often want to be the story, do they? But when you recognise that a healthy journalism, healthy news media is a fundamental part of civil society. We write about other bits of civil society. We need to, concentrate also on this important building block.
So more journalism on journalism.
Good journalism on good journalism.
We'll move to some questions in a bit, but just before the end, just let's try and finish on a kind of uplifting or constructive note. I asked the panel really to sort of come forward with, two things each that any newsroom could adopt to try and think about increasing the impact of what they do. Maybe Styli, start with you.
Yeah, the first thought is really that to plan consciously for it. Right. I mean, if you set yourself a vision and goals around that, then you can work backwards to do that. Now, obviously, that's not always possible, and things happen, and events happen, and the news cycle happens. But I'm a firm believer in that concept of having a vision, knowing what that vision of success looks like, and then putting things in place, working backwards to figure out how to make that happen. And then that's the only way we can measure what matters, is by defining what matters up front, and then moving the chess pieces to get there. And then secondly is that impact is good for business. We talk about news avoidance, we talk about declining audiences, we're talking about declining revenues, but I can tell you that the last 4 years have been spectacular growth for Daily Maverick on all those fronts. Like 5 to 10x on all the key metrics. And a big part of that has been moving towards this membership model, realizing that what is going to drive that membership model is staying true to our cause, achieving the kind of impact from the journalism that helps protect democracy, that helps people navigate the life that they're living, and getting clearer about that and working more and more with our teams to set goals around that. And it's just had phenomenal success for us.
Great. Ritu?
I think for us, it's the minute we've stopped looking as Google Analytic metrics as impact, that's allowed us to say, let's not do the kind of news that's available to everybody on Google News, on Apple News that's already out there. Let's only focus on stories that we think and which we've seen over time make a difference and matter to our audiences. So I think reducing the volume and focusing on more journalism that matters, but to be able to assess and measure, maybe we should use your tracker in why did it matter and how to tell that story better. And the other, of course, is to have the impact. It's very important to put the story version, many format versions of your story on different platforms. You've got to be where the audience is. You've got to be able to give it to them in the formats that they are most likely to engage with. So not just say, I've done this incredible documentary on custodial deaths, and I am, this is such serious stuff that it will only go out in this long form format, is to be able to break it up, because that's the way the impact goes beyond the audiences. You're able to preach beyond the converted, basically.
Thanks, Ritu. Richard, quickly.
Very quickly. I just restate the planning. That's just asking the right question at the beginning is incredibly important. And then secondly, a very tactical thing, but if you're a journalist, you've got your URL of your story, stick it into Google search and see what comes up, and you'll be surprised what impacts you'll find.
Brilliant. Can we go over one question? 2 questions? Go on. Is there a microphone anywhere? Quickly.
Another thing to do is to question the algorithm.
Hi folks, great panel. I'm Joe Mitchell, I'm Head of Impact at the UK's Public Interest News Foundation. I wonder, is it a little unfair to ask individual newsrooms to measure something so complex? And poor Styli is disappearing back to South Africa to hire a whole new role to do this. Are there ways that we can collaborate, that everyone in this room can collaborate together to sort of prove that our societal impact as a sector, if you like?
I'd say we can do both. It's possible to measure impacts at an individual level, but collaboration, I completely agree, would be great.
I'll do one more question.
Hi everyone, my name is Toma Istomin. I'm Deputy Chief Editor at the Kyiv Independent, which is Ukraine's biggest English-speaking publication at the moment. Thank you for this insightful panel, first of all. My question would be to Styli and Ritu regarding the membership. We're a membership-focused media as well. We have about 10,000 members at the moment. What we see a lot is that we offer this exclusive features to our members, such as online events and some special products that we put out, but we see that many of them don't actually consume them, and they support us regardless because of our cause that they believe in. So I was wondering if you have any insights into what special products or features that you offer to your members that prove to be the most popular and that your members appreciate the most. Thank you.
For us, and you're right, we have some members who also, when we get in touch with them and say, we're having this event and would you like to be part of it? They said, listen, I'm busy, I can't come, but keep up the good work. I don't want to participate in that. So there are 2 kinds of members. There are those that come along. I think for us, one of the features that has been that has worked very well for us is the members' opinion vertical that we've created, where one of the perks of being a member is that you get to write your own opinion piece and build your own following using your own writing. And sometimes, I may be a member, my domain expertise may be in aviation or, in something else that we as a site don't have the budgets to look at. And they then see how much traffic that their piece is getting, and I think that's sort of worked well for us, the members' opinion section.
Great. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it short there, but thank you. Thank you very much to my excellent panel. It's been a very good. Thanks, everyone. That's been so much fun. I forgot that the questions were. The questions were at 40 instead of 50.
Thanks, guys. That was great.
Thanks.
Really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
When are you here till?
Tomorrow, heading back tomorrow.
You're sitting.
I apologize, but I have to ask you to quickly leave the room because we have to sanitize everything and prepare for the next event.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.